Titan was colder than a bureaucrat's heart, and if Calix Draven had a credit every time someone told him that, he might have been able to afford a warmer planet. But here he was, standing outside the human embassy like a man who had just told a bad joke and now had to live in it. The place looked like a relic from a bygone era, Cold War chic, all brutalist concrete and enough surveillance tech to make a paranoid android blush. "Calix, you magnificent bastard, welcome back to the ice ball," came the voice of his long-suffering assistant, Trin. She was the kind of person who could make a cup of synth coffee and simultaneously pickpocket you. "I see you made it in one piece, despite the pilot's best efforts, Trin. If I'd known flying with Captain Suicide was your idea of a fun welcome, I would have sent my regards from Mars," Calix replied, rubbing his temples, still vibrating from the shaky landing. "What's with the fireworks?" he asked, pointing at the sky where rockets erupted like they were trying to punch holes through space. "You know, a little thing called human holidays. The Korath have taken a liking to them," Trin answered with a grin that suggested she was enjoying this far too much. "Last week was Thanksgiving. They overcooked the turkey and undercooked diplomacy. Now it's time for New Year's. Who knew giant reptilian warlords would love our traditions?" Calix snorted. "Yeah, and I bet they don't even know about the hangovers yet. This love affair with our culture doesn't seem like the best idea. What's their angle? That's for you to find out," Ambassador Trin said, handing him a datapad. "Might want to put on your thinking cap. Or just your regular cap. It's freezing." Calix scanned the report, noting the tension levels had spiked alongside the Korath's sudden interest in human customs. He imagined alien soldiers swapping rifles for Christmas crackers and shuddered. Great, just what we need. An interstellar Hallmark movie. As they walked into the embassy, Calix couldn't help but notice the Korath soldiers stationed outside. They were hulking figures, all muscle and scales, looking like they could crush a man with a sneeze. Yet there they were, stringing up tinsel and humming something suspiciously akin to jingle bells. Inside, the embassy was a frenzy of human and alien activity. Staffers rushed around like caffeinated ants, trying to ensure everything ran smoothly. It was a thankless task, like trying to herd cats while juggling fire. "Calix, you're here," called out a familiar voice. It was Ambassador Sergius, his predecessor, a man who lived in perpetual exasperation with an expression to match. "I hope you're ready to hold the fort. The Korath are expecting us for a meeting about festivities." Calix grinned, though it was more a baring of teeth. "Of course, Sergius. Nothing says diplomacy like party planning." They moved to the conference room, which was now decked out with twinkling lights and a tree that was more plastic than plant. Alien diplomats sat around the table, their eyes reflecting the lights like predatory Christmas ornaments. The head Korath diplomat, Vornak, rose to greet them, his scaly face attempting what might have been a smile. "Ambassador Draven, it is an honor to welcome you during Earth's festive season. We find your traditions most intriguing." Calix nodded, suppressing the urge to laugh. "Vornak, it's a pleasure. I see you're adopting our customs with gusto. I just hope our holiday cheer isn't a prelude to holiday warfare." Vornak chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together. "We have no intentions of conflict. Your holidays have brought how do you say, a cheerfulness to our ranks. It is unexpected. Unexpected is one word for it," Calix muttered, taking a seat. "Although I'm still puzzled why you'd want to be part of our seasonal insanity." Vornak's eyes gleamed. "The Korath have always sought strength and understanding. Your traditions, strange as they are, offer a different sort of power, unity. Even in strife, unity," Calix repeated, skeptical. "And here I thought it was the bottles of eggnog." The meeting continued, a testament to how humans had somehow infiltrated one of the most feared alien empires with nothing but a calendar and some catchy tunes. As they discussed the logistics of intergalactic merrymaking, Calix couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. After the meeting, Sergius pulled him aside. "Calix, you've got to keep an eye on Vornak. I don't trust this sudden fascination with our culture. It's like when the cat sits on your lap, It's not affection, it's planning something. Calix sighed. Don't worry, I'll keep my eyes peeled and my ears open. If they start asking about April Fools, then we know we're screwed. Leaving the meeting room, Calix and Trin headed to his office. The corridors echoed with chatter, a mix of human and alien voices. It was like being in a galactic melting pot, except the pot might explode any moment. Trin flopped into a chair, her trademark smirk firmly in place. So, what do you think? Are we about to witness the first cosmic Christmas carnage? Calix leaned back, pondering. Honestly, I think we've got a bunch of lizards trying to figure out what human happiness is, and hoping it doesn't involve a knife in the back. But my gut tells me this isn't just about a holiday spirit. There's more at stake. Well, whatever it is, let's hope we make it to Easter without ending up on the Korath's dinner menu, Trin quipped. After all, nothing says diplomacy like avoiding being eaten. Not sure their sudden love for human culture extends to not eating us, but hey, fingers crossed, Calix replied dryly. Trin stood up, stretching. I'll get more intel on this. Maybe there's something we're missing. Or maybe they just really like tinsel. Calix nodded, his mind returning to the image of the Korath soldiers outside, humming human tunes while stringing up lights. It was surreal, like watching a horror film in reverse. But in his line of work, surreal was just Wednesday. As he settled into his office, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending chaos. It was like being on the edge of a bad joke, waiting for the punchline that could level a city. He looked out at the icy landscape of Titan, wondering what the hell was really going on beneath all the cheer. He was about to find out, one way or another, and he wasn't sure if he'd be laughing or crying by the end of it. That evening, as he lay in his quarters, the muffled sounds of celebration echoing through the walls, Calix pondered the strange situation he found himself in. A human ambassador amidst alien holiday enthusiasts, a recipe for disaster if ever there was one. He chuckled darkly to himself. Here's to hoping it's not their version of April Fools already in play. With that comforting thought, he drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of tinsel, alien laughs, and the unmistakable sound of sleigh bells on Titan. The next morning, Calix Draven found himself staring into a cup of synth coffee that could double as an industrial lubricant, contemplating the frosty hell that was Titan. If the moon were any colder, it'd have an honorary doctorate in indifference. He took a sip, grimacing as the coffee tried to convince him it was worth swallowing. Trin strolled in, balancing a stack of datapads like a circus act. Morning, Calix. How's the existential crisis today? Still existential, still a crisis, Calix replied, setting down his mug. What's the bad news, or should I say today's news? Trin dropped the datapads on his desk with the grace of a collapsing building. Well, remember that whole Korath fascination with our holidays. Turns out it's causing some internal drama among their ranks. Great, Calix muttered, scanning the first datapad. Nothing like a good all-cultural upheaval to keep things lively. What's got them all riled up? Did someone forget to send invitations to the Easter egg hunt? Trin chuckled. Worse. Seems there's a faction who think embracing human traditions is a betrayal of their warrior culture. They're not too thrilled about being the galaxy's biggest holiday enthusiasts. Calix leaned back, digesting the information. Let me guess, they're splitting into the pro-tinsel and anti-tinsel camps, pretty much, Trin confirmed with a grin. And here's the kicker, our cloning tech is somehow mixed up in all this. Apparently, they're using it to recreate human holiday experiences. Cloning tech. Calix raised an eyebrow. Did they get bored of real people and decide to make their own party guests? Seems like it, Trin said, tapping at her own datapad. They've cloned Santa Claus, for starters. Because what's a holiday without a jolly old man in red, right? Calix couldn't help but laugh. So, let me get this straight. We've got a bunch of scale-covered warriors playing Secret Santa, and they're using our cloning tech to do it, bingo. And not everyone's happy about it. Calix shook his head, disbelief mingling with amusement. This is what happens when you mix interstellar diplomacy with eggnog. So, what's the plan? Smile, nod, and hope they don't decide to clone Krampus, Trin shrugged. Pretty much. But we've got a meeting with Vornak later. Might want to keep the sarcasm to a minimum. When have I ever been sarcastic? Calix asked, feigning innocence. Trin simply raised an eyebrow, her expression saying everything her words didn't need to. Later that day, Calix found himself in the embassy's conference room again, the twinkling lights casting an oddly festive glow over proceedings that were anything but. Vornak sat opposite him, flanked by a couple of Korath who looked like they could bench press a shuttle. "Ah," Ambassador Draven Vornak began, his gravelly voice rumbling through the room like distant thunder. "I trust you are well enough," Calix replied. "Although I must admit, I didn't expect to be involved in intergalactic holiday planning." Vornak's attempt at a smile was unsettling, like a crocodile with a secret. "Your traditions have invigorated our ranks. Yet not all see this change as positive." Calix nodded. "Yeah, I heard some of your folks aren't thrilled about swapping battle cries for Christmas carols. What's the deal with the cloning tech?" "Ah, yes." Vornak's eyes gleamed with something Calix couldn't quite put his finger on. "We wish to understand your cultures thoroughly. Cloning enables us to experience these traditions firsthand. And by firsthand, you mean creating your own human replicas to join the festivities?" Calix asked, incredulous. "Precisely. But some of us question whether it is wise to adopt such customs so readily." Calix leaned forward. "So you've got a divided empire over whether to toast with eggnog or stick to the usual blood wine." Vornak inclined his head slightly. "In essence," Calix sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, Vornak, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but maybe there's a middle ground. Like, I don't know, adopting some customs without the whole cloning kink." Vornak nodded slowly. "It is a delicate matter." "We seek your guidance." Calix bit back a sarcastic retort. The idea of guiding a bunch of intergalactic warriors through a cultural crisis seemed about as plausible as a snowball fight in hell. "I can try," he said finally. "After all, nothing screams diplomacy like crisis management." Vornak stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "We appreciate your wisdom, Ambassador. Let us hope this season brings unity." As the Korath exited, Calix turned to Trin, who had watched the exchange with barely concealed amusement. "Unity. Right. Because that's exactly what the holidays are known for." Trin chuckled. "At least they haven't started cloning elves yet." "Could you imagine?" Calix shuddered. "I'd rather not." "So what's next?" "We keep an eye on the Korath factions and make sure they don't turn our tech into a holiday horror show," Trin replied. Calix nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. "Let's just hope this doesn't end with us needing to explain to Earth why Titans suddenly got a Santa army." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and reports. Calix juggled the demands of diplomacy with the ever-present threat of chaos bubbling beneath the surface. The situation with the Korath was a ticking time bomb, and he was acutely aware that one wrong move could set it off. As evening approached, he found a moment of quiet in his office, the muffled sounds of celebration still audible outside. The Korath had embraced human holidays with alarming enthusiasm, and despite the potential for disaster, there was something almost endearing about their efforts to understand humanity. "Almost. Thinking about your new alien holiday club?" Trin asked, appearing at his door like she had an uncanny knack for reading his mind. "Something like that," Calix replied. "I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something. It's like there's a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit. Maybe they're just really into caroling," Trin suggested with a smirk. "Or maybe they're trying to lull us into a false sense of security with their goodwill." "Wouldn't be the first time," Calix said. "But there's something else. Something about that cloning tech angle. It's too convenient." Trin leaned against the doorframe, considering. "You think they're up to something more than just recreating holiday spirit?" Calix nodded slowly. "Call it a hunch. But I didn't get this job because I look good in a suit." "Good thing, too," Trin quipped. "So what's the plan?" "Keep digging. See what else you can find about their cloning efforts. If there's more to it, I want to know." Trin saluted with a mock seriousness. Aye, aye, Captain. I'll see what skeletons or Santas they've got in the closet. As she left, Calix turned back to the window, staring out at the icy landscape. The Korath's sudden embrace of human culture was both a blessing and a curse. It offered an opportunity for deeper understanding, but it also hid a potential threat beneath its cheerful exterior. Outside, the lights twinkled like stars, a facade of warmth in the chilling cold. Calix knew there was more at stake than just holiday cheer. The Korath's interest in human cloning was a dangerous game, and he had a sinking feeling they weren't playing just for fun. With a heavy sigh, he turned back to his desk, determined to uncover the truth before it was too late. If he was going to navigate the treacherous waters of intergalactic diplomacy, he'd need more than just wit and sarcasm. He'd need a miracle, or an army of cloned elves, whichever came first. Calix Draven leaned back in his creaky office chair, which had all the comfort of a medieval torture device, and tried to focus on the new wave of reports. One datapad in particular caught his attention. It was from Zira Voss, the tech-savvy engineer with a knack for making miracles from scraps and sarcasm from thin air. Zira barged in, not bothering to knock. She was the kind of person who treated doors as more of a suggestion than a barrier. "Got your message, boss," she said, dropping another datapad on his desk. "And by message, I mean the passive-aggressive email about urgent priorities." "Glad you could make it," Calix replied dryly, glancing at the datapad. "I was hoping you could shed some light on the Korath's cloning tech. I've got a hunch there's more to it than just playing dress-up with human holidays." Zira snorted, leaning against the desk. "You mean the alien warriors aren't actually interested in hand-knitted Christmas sweaters?" "Shocking." "Exactly," Calix said. "The Korath are too strategic to invest this much in something without a payoff. I need you to dig into their system, see if there's a hidden agenda." "Already on it," Zira said with a hint of pride. Her fingers danced over her datapad with the kind of precision that suggested she could hack into, well, anything. "Their tech is tough but not impenetrable. They're good but not human good." Calix grinned. "That's the spirit." "What have you found so far?" She pulled up a holographic display from her datapad, a web of data points and connections. "So, here's the thing, the cloning tech they're using. It's not just for ho-ho-ho and mistletoe. They're creating replicas that can infiltrate human systems." "Of course they are," Calix muttered. "Why stop at holiday cheer when you can have espionage on top?" "Exactly," Zira agreed. "Those fake Santas, they're learning our systems, our weaknesses. They're gathering intel under the guise of festivity." Calix scratched his chin thoughtfully. "So the holiday thing is a cover. They're destabilizing themselves and us in one fell swoop. Brilliant in a horribly devious way. And it gets better," Zira added. "Their factions are at odds about it. The pro-tinsel camp is in it for the holiday fun, but the anti-tinsel lot, they're using it as an excuse to gather intel and maybe even recruit." "Divide and conquer," Calix sighed. "Classic play but with a festive twist." Zira smirked. "You got it, so what's the plan? Do we play along or do we throw a spanner in the works?" Calix tapped his fingers on the datapad, considering. "We need more intel before we make a move. Keep digging but stay under their radar. If they catch wind, we can kiss our advantage goodbye." "Understood," Zira said, her expression serious for once. "I'll keep you posted." As she left, Calix sat back, contemplating the tangled web of human and Korath agendas. The situation was more precarious than he had realized. It seemed the Korath weren't just interested in singing carols. They were tuning into the frequency of intergalactic skullduggery. Later that day, Calix found himself back in the embassy's conference room for another delightful round of diplomatic cage fighting. Vornak was there, looking as inscrutable as ever, like a statue with a penchant for drama. "Ambassador Draven," Vornak began, his voice a low rumble. "I trust you are prepared to discuss the developments." Calix fought the urge to roll his eyes. "Always ready for a chat about your newfound appreciation for human celebrations. Although I must say, the espionage angle is a fascinating twist." Vornak's expression didn't change, but Calix could sense a shift in the air. "We have no intention of hostility," Vornak said. "Of course not," Calix replied. "Just like I have no intention of drinking this swill they call synth coffee." "But here we are." Vornak considered this, then nodded slightly. "You are perceptive, Ambassador. It is true that not all among us share the enthusiasm for replication. Some see it as a means to an end." Calix leaned forward, intrigued. "And what end might that be?" "Understanding your kind more deeply," Vornak said, his gaze unblinking. "To predict your actions, anticipate your moves." "By pretending to be jolly old St. Nick?" Calix asked, incredulous. "A simple guise," Vornak admitted. "But effective." Calix rubbed his temples. "Look, Vornak, we're both on the same moon, so to speak. But these games, they could lead to something neither of us wants." Vornak's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what is it that you want, Ambassador?" "For starters, not ending up on the wrong side of a Korath 4th of July parade," Calix replied. "And maybe, just maybe, a bit of trust." "Trust is earned, not given," Vornak said, a hint of steel in his voice. "Then let's start earning," Calix suggested, holding Vornak's gaze. The meeting ended without fireworks or festive explosions, but Calix felt a flicker of hope. A cautious step forward, though the path remained treacherous. As Calix returned to his office, Trin joined him, curiosity written all over her face. "How'd it go with Santa's little helper?" Calix smirked. "Better than expected." "Vornak's starting to crack, but we've got a long way to go." "And what's your plan for when things inevitably go sideways?" Trin asked. "Improvise," Calix said with a wink. "And hope Zira's digging pays off." Trin nodded, a mix of trust and skepticism. "Guess we better start practicing our carols, just in case." As Calix settled in for another long night of scheming and strategy, he couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was spiraling towards a climax. The Korath's fascination with human traditions was both their strength and their weakness, a double-edged sword that could cut either way. With the flickering lights of the embassy casting shadows like dancing specters, Calix knew one thing for certain: the countdown to calamity had begun, and the only thing that could stop it was a miracle, or the sheer audacity of humans who refused to go down without a fight. The following day, Calix met Zira in one of the embassy's dimly lit corridors. She had an excited glint in her eye that usually meant trouble or breakthrough. "You're going to love this," she said, almost vibrating with energy. "Please tell me you've discovered a way to make synth coffee taste like real coffee," Calix said. "Even better," Zira replied, thrusting her datapad into his hands. "I've found a backdoor into their cloning systems." "Turns out their security is about as tight as a sieve." Calix looked at the data, a plan forming in his mind. "So what you're saying is we can do a little creative reprogramming." "Exactly," Zira confirmed. "We can introduce a failsafe, a little something to keep them from going full Grinch on us." Calix grinned. "Zira, you're a genius." "I know," she replied smugly. "But what do you have in mind?" Calix thought for a moment, weighing the options. "Something subtle, a way to ensure their clones can't be used against us if things go south. Like a Trojan horse, but less wooden," Zira suggested. "Exactly," Calix said. "Except this one's stuffed with holiday cheer." "If by holiday cheer you mean a crippling virus, then yes," Zira said with a wicked smile. "Can you do it?" Calix asked. "Can I do it?" Zira repeated, feigning offense. "What do you take me for? Of course I can do it." "Then let's get to work," Calix said, feeling a surge of hope amidst the chaos. As the hours ticked by, Calix and Zira worked furiously, a mismatched pair of strategists weaving their own web amidst the tinsel and treachery. The air buzzed with energy, the quiet hum of determination and possibility. By the time they finished, the embassy was silent, the corridors empty except for the two of them. It was a fragile piece, but it was theirs. "We did it," Zira said, a note of triumph in her voice. "Yeah," Calix replied, exhaustion and satisfaction mingling in equal measure. "Now we just have to see if it holds. Or if the whole thing blows up in our faces," Zira added, always the realist. Calix chuckled. "Either way, it'll be a hell of a show." As they stood together in the dim light, Calix felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Korath's fascination with human holidays was just the tip of the iceberg, a veneer hiding a deeper conflict that could explode at any moment. But for now, they had a fighting chance. And sometimes that's all you needed. "Let's hope the next meeting doesn't involve any more surprises," Calix said, though he knew better than to believe it. With the Korath. "Always expect surprises," Zira replied, packing up her datapad. As they parted ways, Calix returned to his office, the ever-present uncertainty looming like a shadow. The world outside was silent, the icy landscape of Titan a stark reminder of the challenges ahead. But Calix Draven was not one to back down. Not when there was a chance to turn the tables, to outwit even the most cunning of foes. With a weary yet determined heart, he prepared for the days to come, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. Calix Draven was beginning to think that Titan was the universe's way of proving it had a sense of humor. The kind that involved slipping on ice, face-planting in the snow, and then being laughed at by an audience of one. Himself. The human embassy on Titan was buzzing with a nervous energy that could power the moon for a month, and not in a good way. He sat at his desk, staring at his datapad, trying to drown out the ambient noise with a synth coffee that tasted like it was brewed from an old boot. "Well, at least it's consistent," he muttered, taking another sip. It was still better than dealing with the Korath's latest antics. Trin plopped into the chair opposite him, balancing a stack of datapads that looked like a precarious game of Jenga. "You hear the latest?" Calix raised an eyebrow. "If it's about the Korath's new line of festive infiltration robots, I'm all ears." "Not quite," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "They're blaming us for their internal mess. Apparently, we've corrupted them with our excessive frivolity and seasonal cheer." Calix let out a low whistle. "Wow, I knew we were good, but I didn't realize we were cultural nuclear bombs." Trin snorted. "Vornak's been making noises about this leading to war. He's gathered all the anti-human factions, whipped them into a froth. It's like watching my uncle after 3 cups of eggnog." "War," Calix repeated, tasting the word like a particularly bitter root. "Over the fact that they can't decide if they like turkey or tinsel more. That's rich. Meanwhile, our lovely engineers are wiring our defenses with garlands and mistletoe," Trin added. "Because nothing says peace on Earth, goodwill toward men like explosive wreaths. Speaking of," Calix said, standing up with a sense of purpose that even he found surprising. "I need to check on Zira. If anyone can turn this holiday hellscape into something useful, it's her." Trin gave him a knowing look. "Just don't get caught under any mistletoe with her." "I hear she bites," Calix chuckled, making his way down the corridor to Zira's lair. A tech haven that looked like a junkyard had an illicit affair with a supercomputer. Wires dangled from the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of overheating circuits and something that might have once been food. Zira was elbows deep in a console, a tangle of wires and circuit boards spread out before her like a surgeon's tools. "I heard the Korath are blaming us for their version of a midlife crisis," she said without looking up. "Yeah," Calix replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Apparently our parties are too wild and now they're threatening to crash the whole thing by going nuclear." Zira snorted. "Typical. They take our traditions, twist them into something unrecognizable, and then act surprised when it all goes to pot." Calix nodded, watching her work. "Got any bright ideas on how to handle this mess?" She paused, considering. "We could make their love for our traditions work for us. Feed them a little cultural propaganda, maybe. After all, what's more human than turning a bad situation to our advantage?" Calix grinned. "You thinking what I'm thinking? Start a Korath New Year's resolution craze," Zira suggested dryly. "New year, new me, or in their case, new species, new peace." "Exactly," Calix agreed. "And while we're at it, slip in a few messages. Encourage them to be a little more human-friendly. Maybe even push for peace." Zira nodded, a sly smile playing on her lips. "If nothing else, it'll confuse them long enough for us to get ahead." "Count me in," Calix said. After all, if we can't beat them with logic, we'll beat them with festive cheer. A taboy, Zira replied, her fingers flying over her datapad as she initiated the plan. Later, Calix found himself back in the conference room, facing Vornak once more. The Korath ambassador looked particularly stone-faced today, eyes glinting with barely restrained anger. "Ambassador Draven," he began, his voice as smooth as graveyard dirt. "Vornak," Calix replied, meeting his gaze head-on. "I hear the Korath are planning an interstellar fireworks display." "Should I bring marshmallows?" Vornak's expression didn't flicker. "The situation is grave, Ambassador. We cannot ignore the destabilization your culture has brought." "Destabilization," Calix repeated, feigning shock. "All because of a little eggnog and tinsel. I always said our traditions were potent, but I didn't realize they were weapons grade." Vornak bristled. "Your mockery does not help. Neither does blaming us for your internal squabbles," Calix retorted. "Look, Vornak, we're not the bad guys here. We're just trying to get by on this frozen rock without blowing each other up." "Your traditions have divided our people," Vornak insisted. Calix leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. "Then maybe it's time to use our traditions to unite us. Peaceful ones. Like New Year's. A chance to start fresh, make resolutions. How about a resolution for peace?" Vornak considered this, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "And how do you propose we do this?" "We'll help," Calix offered. "We've got experts in turning chaos into calm. It's practically a human specialty." Vornak's eyes, dark as a black hole, flickered with something Calix couldn't quite place. "Hope, maybe." "Very well, Ambassador Draven. We shall see if your traditions can do what diplomacy has failed to." As the meeting adjourned, Calix felt a mixture of relief and dread. They'd bought some time, but the real work was just beginning. And if their plan failed, it wouldn't just be the Korath who'd have a holiday hangover. Back in his office, Calix found Trin waiting, her expression a mix of curiosity and impatience. "So, how'd it go with the Grinch?" "Surprisingly well," he admitted. "We might have a shot at turning their fascination with our traditions into a peace initiative." "Really?" Trin asked, skepticism etched across her face. "How'd you manage that?" "By promising them a happier new year if they play nice," Calix replied with a shrug. "And a little help from Zira's technical wizardry." Trin shook her head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "You really are a glutton for punishment, diving headfirst into a Korath mess." "Someone's got to," Calix said. "And let's face it, we're the best at taking a mess and making it our own." "That's one way to put it," Trin agreed, a hint of a smile breaking through her cynical exterior. As Calix sat back, contemplating their precarious position, Zira's voice crackled over the comm, bringing with it a sense of urgency. "Calix, you might want to get down here." Things just got interesting. Calix knew better than to ignore Zira's version of interesting. He was out of his chair and halfway down the corridor before Trin could say another word. He arrived at Zira's tech lair to find her hunched over a bank of monitors displaying the Korath communications network. "What is it?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. "Intercepted a transmission," Zira said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Looks like the anti-tinsel faction is planning a coup. They're taking advantage of the chaos." "Because of course they are," Calix muttered, rubbing his temples. "And our plan to convey them into peace, still possible," Zira said, though she didn't sound convinced. "But we need to act fast." "How fast?" Calix asked, knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "Yesterday," Zira replied with a grimace. "If we don't stop this, there'll be Korath fireworks and not the good kind." Calix sighed, staring at the monitors. The Korath's fascination with human traditions had spiraled out of control, and now the very thing they'd intended to use as a bridge was threatening to burn them all. "Then we need to make sure our plan goes off without a hitch," Calix said, determination hardening his voice. "We've got to rally the pro-tinsel faction and fast." Zira nodded, already pulling up another screen. "We can use their own network to send a message. They're already primed for it. All we need is the spark." "And if that doesn't work?" Calix asked. Then we break out the marshmallows, Zira replied, her tone leaving no doubt as to what she meant. Calix chuckled, despite the tension twisting his gut. Let's do it then. Let's give them a New Year's resolution they won't forget. As they worked, Calix couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, on a frozen moon orbiting a distant planet, using holiday traditions to avert a war. But if anyone could pull it off, it was this ragtag team of humans who saw the universe not as a place to be feared, but as a place to thrive. Even if it meant doing so with a wink and a nod, and maybe just a little bit of holiday magic. With each keystroke, Calix felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Korath's fascination with human holidays might be their undoing, but it was also their hope. A slender thread, maybe, but enough to hang a future on. And so, with a steely resolve and a touch of irreverent humor, they set about crafting their message, a call for peace wrapped in tinsel and delivered with all the audacity humanity could muster. In the end, it wasn't about the traditions themselves, but the spirit behind them. A shared desire for something more than war, more than distrust. It was about forging a new path, one that might just lead to a brighter future for both humans and Korath. As the message went out, Calix knew it was only the beginning. But it was a start, and sometimes that's all you needed. Calix Draven sat in the dim glow of Zira's tech lair, feeling like he was part of the worst holiday special ever conceived. The Korath were supposed to be fascinated by human traditions, not trying to use them as the centerpiece for a civil war. He had to admit, they were lousy party guests. The monitors flickered with intercepted transmissions, each glowing with dire implications. Zira was hunched over her screens, fingers flying over the virtual keyboard like a pianist having a nervous breakdown. I swear, if I have to listen to one more conversation about tinsel, I'm going to strangle someone with it, she muttered. Look on the bright side, Calix offered, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. At least you won't have to worry about cleaning up afterwards if the building's a smoking crater. Zira snickered, a sound halfway between a laugh and a snort. Every cloud, right? The situation was about as stable as a sandcastle in a hurricane. The Korath's fascination with human holidays had spiraled into a factional war, and now the embassy was squarely in the crosshairs. Vornak's anti-human faction seemed hell-bent on blowing up anything even remotely resembling peace, and with the Korath's tech, they could do it with style. Think we can really pull this off? Calix asked, more to himself than to Zira. Make everyone hold hands and sing Auld Lang Syne instead of blow everyone to hell. Zira looked up, her eyes reflecting the harsh light of the monitors. We've turned worse shitshows around. Remember that time on Ganymede? True, Calix said, recalling the diplomatic disaster involving a mining rights dispute and a crate of highly illegal whiskey. But I'm pretty sure we had less chance of being vaporized back then. Details, Zira replied. We're not dead yet, so I'm calling it a win. Small mercies, Calix said, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that they were balancing on a knife's edge. The Korath's interest in human traditions had gone from amusing to deadly in record time, and now the future rested on a cultural exchange that felt more like a hostage negotiation. A sudden loud bang echoed through the corridors, shaking dust from the ceiling tiles. Both Calix and Zira flinched, exchanging a glance that said, "Well, here we go." Calix tapped his earpiece. Trin, what the hell was that? Trin's voice came through with a crackle, laden with the usual sarcasm. That, dear colleague, was what I believe they call in military terms a warning shot. Any idea who's doing the warning? Calix asked, already jogging towards the exit with Zira in tow. Trin's response was dry as a martini. Whoever's shooting at us, I'd wager. And they're not using tinsel. The pair hurried down to the main control center, where Chaos had set up shop and was offering a buy one get one free deal. Embassy staff darted around like ants at a picnic, all while the consoles screamed bloody murder with warnings of impending doom. Status report, Trin, Calix barked as they arrived, doing his best impression of someone in charge. Trin, leaning casually against a console, waved a hand at the screens. Well, the good news is the embassy's still standing. The bad news is, the Korath anti-tinsel faction is trying to change that. They're approaching with enough firepower to remodel the landscape. Great, Zira said, slipping into a vacant chair and typing furiously. Just what I needed today. A front row seat to a fireworks show I didn't sign up for. Calix rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming like a storm cloud. Can we get a message out? Rally the pro-tinsel folks before this turns into a Korath barbecue. Zira's fingers didn't pause, already working on it. But it's going to be tight. Trin threw her hands up. Tight. We're already in a Korath-sized pressure cooker and someone's about to turn up the heat. Calix knew she was right. The embassy wasn't equipped to withstand a full-scale assault, and the Korath weren't known for restraint when it came to internal disputes. If they didn't get support and fast, they'd be toast. Any chance we can bluff our way out of this? Calix asked, desperately grasping at straws. Zira didn't look up. Bluffing requires the other guy to think you have a better hand. Right now, we're holding a pair of fives while they're showing a royal flush. Perfect, Calix muttered. Remind me to never play poker with the Korath. A fresh series of explosions shook the building, and Calix felt the kind of fear that knotted your stomach and squeezed hard. The embassy was becoming less of a diplomatic outpost and more of a ticking time bomb. Options, people? He asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. Trin considered it, her face a mask of calm. Run like hell. Zira made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a cough. I'm a fan of living to fight another day. Then that's our plan, Calix said. Let's bail and hope the Korath calm down before they turn Titan into an ice rink with craters. The trio moved quickly, gathering essentials and abandoning the embassy before it became a permanent crater in the Titan landscape. Outside, the air was too cold, like it had given up trying to pretend it was breathable. Calix shivered, partly from the cold, mostly from the adrenaline. They raced through the thin atmosphere of Titan, keeping low and out of sight as they headed for a network of tunnels. The Korath's confusion over human traditions might have thrown them a lifeline, but it was a fragile one. And as someone once said, hope is a good breakfast but a poor dinner. We've got to keep spreading the message, Calix said as they ducked into the tunnels, the walls echoing with their footsteps. If the pro-tinsel faction doesn't weigh in, we're screwed. Zira was already tapping away on her datapad as they moved. I'm on it. But these tunnels block signals like nobody's business. Figures, Trin said, her voice bouncing off the walls. Bet they weren't designed with wireless in mind. As they navigated through the claustrophobic passages, Calix couldn't help but think how absurd it all was. Here they were, on the run from a species that had decided human holidays were the ultimate guide to social structure, right up until they weren't. You know, Zira said, her voice laced with irony, when I signed up for diplomatic service, I didn't think it involved running for my life while selling Christmas as the path to galactic peace. Hey, it's all part of the job description, Calix replied. Right between keep the peace and avoid being blown up. That's reassuring, Trin added. Next time, I'll be sure to read the fine print. The tunnels led them to a hidden alcove, a makeshift hideout stocked with supplies that wouldn't win any culinary awards. Calix dropped his pack and sat against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Let's hope this works, he said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. We need the pro-tinsel folks to pull through. Zira was still glued to her datapad. If anyone can make peace out of this mess, it's us. We're scrappy like that, scrappy, Trin said, rolling her eyes. Is that the diplomatic term? Close enough, Calix said. Whatever happens, we stick together. Deal, deal, Zira and Trin echo, the humor in their voices masking the worry just beneath the surface. As they huddled in their cold hideout, Calix couldn't help but think of Earth, of quiet nights and warm fires, of family and friends. But they had a job to do out here, one that mattered more than comfort or safety. They had to make sure the message got through, that peace had a fighting chance amid the chaos. Because if there was one thing Calix Draven had learned, it was that humans had a knack for surviving the impossible. even if it meant doing so with a sarcastic grin and a heart full of stubborn hope. Calix Draven sat in the half-lit alcove, staring at Zira as she continued to tap furiously at her datapad. The tunnels were as inviting as a public restroom on a bad day, and the chill had seeped into his bones, making him wonder if hypothermia was a preferable alternative to being vaporized by Korath tech. "Any chance you've got good news in there?" Calix asked, nodding at the datapad. "Or are we still set to become Titan's newest craters?" Zira didn't look up. "Well, if you consider not being blown up yet as good news, then sure, we're golden." Trin snorted, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. "At this point, I'll take any news that doesn't involve us running for our lives." Again, Calix rubbed his temples, feeling the tension like a vice around his skull. "So what's the play, Zira? Please tell me you've got a rabbit in that magic hat of yours." Zira paused, her eyes flicking up to meet his briefly. "A rabbit, more like a genetically modified hamster." She tapped on the datapad, a sly grin slowly spreading across her face. "But I might have stumbled onto something here. And it's got nothing to do with festive infiltration robots." Calix leaned forward, curiosity piqued despite the dire circumstances. "Do tell. I'm all ears." "You know how the Korath are obsessed with human holidays," Zira said, still engrossed in her work. "Turns out their cloning technology isn't just for making creepy Santa replicas. They're literally trying to clone the experience of our holidays." "It's like cloning a turkey if you ask me." Trin perked up, eyebrows raised. "Cloning experiences, that sounds patently insane." "Exactly," Zira replied, a hint of triumph in her voice. "But it got me thinking, if they can clone that, maybe we can use it to our advantage." Calix narrowed his eyes. "So, what are you suggesting?" "We offer them an all-inclusive holiday package in exchange for not blowing us to smithereens." Zira let out a strangled laugh. "Something like that. If they want human experience so badly, maybe we can give them one that shifts their focus away from blowing each other up." "Wouldn't be the first time a party saved the day," Trin quipped. Calix considered the idea, his mind racing. It was crazy, but then again, their whole situation was a 2-for-1 deal on insanity. "We'd need to get a message to the Pro-Tinsel faction, convince them that the whole peace on Earth thing is more than just a sales pitch." "Not easy when you're stuck in a signal-blocking tunnel system," Zira said, her voice dripping with irony. Calix sighed, the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. "I don't suppose you packed a signal booster," Zira chuckled darkly. "If I had one, do you think I'd be spending my time freezing my ass off in this tunnel?" Trin scratched her head as if considering their limited options. "What about using the Korath tech against them? If they're cloning experiences, surely they've got a way to transmit them too." Zira's eyes lit up. "Now there's an idea. If we can tap into their systems, maybe we can hijack their broadcasting tech and send a message directly." "Is that even possible?" Calix asked, a mixture of hope and skepticism in his voice. Zira's fingers flew over the virtual keyboard, her focus razor-sharp. "Possible. Let's just say I've done crazier things with less time and more hacking." Trin leaned back, her face a mask of amused disbelief. "So we're going to ride the wave of Korath technology to spread peace and goodwill. Santa's sleigh, but make it sci-fi." Calix chuckled wryly. "Sounds like a plan. All right, Zira, what do you need from us?" "Distraction," she replied without hesitation. "I'll need time to hack into their systems, and that's not happening if we're dodging plasma bolts every 2 minutes." Trin stretched, cracking her knuckles. "I suppose it's our turn to play decoy then. Always wanted to know what it felt like to be target practice." "Just another day in the life," Calix said, getting to his feet and checking his gear. "Let's hope this plan is less disastrous than it sounds." With a nod, Zira returned to her work, her resolve unshakable. Calix and Trin exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke volumes, the sort that only came from facing death together more times than seemed reasonable. As they prepared to head out, Calix couldn't help but feel a flicker of something unexpected: hope. It was a fragile thing, likely to snap under the weight of reality, but it was there nonetheless. "Let's give them the best damn holiday show they've ever seen," he said, attempting to inject some levity into their grim mission. Trin clapped him on the back. "And here I thought you'd lost your sense of optimism. Lead the way, Scrooge." Calix grinned despite himself. "Bah humbug." They left Zira behind in the alcove, moving with purpose through the tunnels. The air was thick with tension, but it only served to sharpen their determination. If they could pull this off, maybe, just maybe, they'd have a shot at turning this Korath disaster into a victory. The tunnels eventually led them back to the surface, where the pale light of Titan cast everything in a ghostly glow. The Korath forces were still there, an ominous presence that seemed to grow with every step they took. "All right, Trin," Calix said, surveying the landscape. "Time to make some noise." Trin flashed a grin, already reaching for her gear. "I've been dying for some excitement." Calix pulled out his comms device, linking it to the embassy's external speakers. "Korath troops," he began, his voice booming across the barren landscape. "You're all invited to the first annual intergalactic holiday extravaganza." "Drinks on us." Trin rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Think anyone's going to RSVP? Doesn't matter," Calix replied. "All we need is their attention," and attention they got. The Korath forces shifted, their ranks moving like a wave as they adjusted to the unexpected provocation. "Here they come," Trin said, her tone equal parts excitement and dread. "Just keep them occupied," Calix reminded her. "Zira needs as much time as we can give her." "Hey, if they want a show, I'm more than happy to oblige," Trin said with a shrug. As they prepared to engage, Calix couldn't help but feel a grim sense of purpose. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and probably out of their minds, but they had one thing going for them, that damn stubborn human spirit that refused to quit. The first wave came at them with lethal precision, and Calix moved on instinct, dodging and weaving as plasma bolts scorched the ground. Trin was right beside him, her movements fluid and calculated, a dance of survival against a backdrop of chaos. "Kind of reminds you of New Year's, doesn't it?" Trin shouted over the din, her voice a mixture of adrenaline and mirth. "Yeah," Calix replied, ducking under a particularly close shot. "Except with less fireworks and more risk of death. They fought with everything they had. Every second they could hold the Korath at bay was another second for Zira to do her magic. It was a grim process, but one they were all too familiar with. Back in the tunnels, Zira was a whirlwind of focus and determination. Her mind was a calculated storm, processing data and manipulating code with the skill of someone who had long since accepted that life was a series of increasingly difficult challenges. "Almost there," she muttered to herself, pushing her limits in a way only desperation could inspire. The Korath systems were notoriously complex, but Zira was nothing if not resourceful. She delved into their networks with a ferocity that would have been terrifying if not for its precision. She was in their systems now, navigating the digital landscape like a seasoned explorer in a jungle of code. When she finally found what she was looking for, she couldn't help but feel a thrill of triumph. The Korath channels were open, and she had the means to broadcast their message. All she needed was the right trigger. With a deep breath, she activated the transmission. "To all Korath factions," her voice echoed through the Korath systems, a ghostly presence in the digital realm. "This is Zira Voss, human engineer and part-time holiday enthusiast. We come in peace, with the hope that we can share our traditions without tearing each other apart." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We understand your fascination with our holidays, and we want to offer you a chance to experience them in their fullness, without the baggage of conflict. Join us, and together we can create a new tradition, one that celebrates peace and understanding." Zira didn't know if her words would be enough, if they would reach the hearts and minds of those who heard them. But it was a shot worth taking. Back on the surface, the Korath forces hesitated, a collective pause that rippled through their ranks. Calix and Trin took the opportunity to regroup, retreating to a safer position with a newfound sense of hope. "Did it work?" Trin asked, catching her breath as they crouched behind a rocky outcrop. Calix glanced at his communicator, a grin spreading across his face. Looks like it might have. The Korath are standing down. From the alcove, Zira watched the readouts on her screen, relief washing over her. It seemed their gamble had paid off, at least for now. As the Korath stood down, uncertainty replaced hostility in their eyes. It was a tentative piece, fragile and untested, but it was a start. Calix surveyed the scene, his heart lighter than it had been in days. "Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for a break," Trin laughed, a sound that mingled with the strange quiet of the battlefield. "And maybe a drink or two." "Yeah," Calix said, allowing himself a rare moment of levity. "I think we've earned it." As they turned to head back, Calix couldn't help but wonder what the future held. But for now, they had managed to buy themselves some time, and in the grand scheme of things, that was a victory worth celebrating. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was finding hope in the darkest of places, even when the odds were stacked against them. And maybe, just maybe, that stubborn optimism was the real gift they brought to the galaxy. Calix flicked a speck of dust off his jacket, the fabric a patchwork of battle scars and questionable decisions. "Well, that was a delightful little skirmish," he said, voice as dry as the Martian desert. Trin was still catching her breath, leaning against the rocky outcrop like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Yeah, nothing says holiday cheer quite like dodging death rays." Calix smirked. "At least we got their attention. Now comes the fun part, convincing them not to obliterate us." Ah, the old "please don't kill us" routine, always a crowd pleaser. Trin glanced at the Korath forces, who were now more confused than combative. "Think they are buying it?" "Only one way to find out," Calix muttered, squaring his shoulders as if that could somehow bolster his dwindling confidence. He activated his comms again, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention, esteemed Korath leaders," he began, trying to sound like someone other than a guy who'd just been using his own limbs for cover. "We have information that might interest you, specifically evidence of sabotage within your own ranks." Trin raised an eyebrow. Nothing like airing someone else's dirty laundry. The Korath forces paused, their curiosity piqued if not their trust. It was a start, a wobbly, precarious start dangling over a canyon of potential disaster. "This better work," Trin whispered, as though Calix's poorly calculated gamble could hear and respond to reason. The Korath commanders, an imposing group of figures with an air of permanent disappointment, approached. Their leader, a hulking mass of muscle and technological augmentation, stepped forward. Vornak, Calix assumed, the one who probably thought diplomacy was a disease. "You have 2 minutes, human," Vornak growled, his voice like gravel grinding under a steel boot. "Generous," Calix replied, offering a smile that was probably more toothy than charming. "I'll make it quick. Your obsession with our holidays, it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's refreshingly weird. But some folks on your side aren't keen on the whole peace and goodwill angle." Vornak's eyes narrowed, suspicion brewing like a storm. "You claim to have evidence of this accusation." Calix nodded, fingers dancing over his communicator, projecting the file Zira had decrypted, images and transmissions showing a faction within the Korath plotting to undermine Vornak's leadership by staging false attacks and blaming humans. Trin leaned closer, her voice low. "Think they'll appreciate us showing them their laundry in public?" "Not our problem if they don't," Calix replied. "I'm here for solutions, not social niceties." Vornak studied the images, his expression shifting from hostile skepticism to, well, less hostile skepticism. "And why should we trust this intel?" "Because," Calix said, his voice steady, "we're not the ones with a vested interest in keeping you at war. Besides, I'm sure your intelligence guys are already whispering the same thing in your ear." Vornak's gaze flickered to his advisors, confirming Calix's guess. "Let's say I believe you. What do you propose?" "Simple," Calix replied, which was a lie because there was nothing simple about this mess. "Embrace the holidays. Not just the kitschy decorations and overeating, but the core values. Peace, understanding. We're offering a cultural exchange, a chance to start fresh." You're suggesting we become more human. Vornak's tone was incredulous, a hint of derision dancing on the edge. Humanish, Calix corrected with a shrug. Look, humanity's not a great role model. We're messy, chaotic, and perpetually 5 minutes from disaster. But we've got one thing right, the ability to pull together when it counts. Trin added, think of it as an intergalactic potluck. You bring the tech, we'll bring the questionable food choices. Questionable is being generous, Calix muttered under his breath. Vornak's expression was unreadable, a stone wall with the occasional breeze of emotion flitting across it. And what of the faction against this? Those who would see our traditions remain unchanged. Calix took a deep breath. This was the tricky part. Deal with them as you see fit. But remember, growth doesn't mean forgetting who you are. It means adding to it. Vornak considered this, a slow rumination that felt like waiting for an asteroid to decide which planet to obliterate. Your words are unexpected, he admitted. I will take them into consideration. Calix exchanged a glance with Trin, who looked as surprised as he felt. That's all we ask, Calix replied. With a curt nod, Vornak turned away, his entourage following. The Korath forces began to disperse, their initial aggression replaced by a more subdued curiosity. Did that just happen? Trin said, almost to herself. Calix exhaled, a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. I think so, we might have actually pulled it off. Or we just delayed the inevitable, Trin pointed out, ever the realist. Still, I'll take a delay over a plasma bolt any day. Optimism. Never thought I'd see the day, Calix teased. Don't get used to it, Trin shot back, smiling despite herself. Back in the tunnels, Zira was grinning like a maniac, her fingers still flying over her datapad as she monitored the situation. Well, that went better than expected, she said through the comms. I was ready to start playing the funeral march. Never doubted you for a second, Calix lied, his voice brimming with mock sincerity. Zira laughed, a sound more mechanical than musical thanks to the static-laden connection. Sure you didn't, but seriously nice work out there. If they buy into this cultural exchange thing, we might actually survive till next year. If we keep this up, we'll be looking at a whole new chapter of interspecies relations, Trin added, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. Calix nodded, though she couldn't see him. Yeah, and hopefully one without us playing target practice. Zira's voice crackled through again. So what's next? We throw a party and hope everything sticks. Pretty much, Calix replied. With any luck, the Korath will find something appealing in our chaos. Maybe they'll even introduce us to a few of their own traditions. Trin chuckled. Great. Just what we need, more reasons to question our life choices. Calix grinned. Hey, at least it'll be interesting. As they made their way back to the embassy, the tension that had wrapped around them like a death shroud began to loosen. It wasn't entirely gone. There were still problems to solve, alliances to mend, and a whole lot of distrust to navigate. But for now, they'd managed to carve out a small slice of peace. I guess we should get working on that intergalactic holiday potluck, Trin mused as they walked. Calix couldn't help but laugh. You volunteering to bring the turkey? Not unless you want it to taste like burnt rubber, Trin shot back. Well, burnt rubber's still better than synth coffee, Calix replied, suppressing a shudder at the memory of the sludge they had to drink to stay awake. Their banter carried them back to the embassy, where they were met with a mix of relief and curiosity. It seemed word of the tentative truce had spread faster than rumors of free booze at a spaceport bar. Looks like we've got some explaining to do, Trin said, waving off the curious glances from their colleagues. Yeah, Calix replied, running a hand through his hair. Imagine the headlines. Ragtag team saves galaxy with holiday spirit. We're practically legends. Or cautionary tales, Trin countered, ever the pessimist with a side of humor. The embassy's cold, utilitarian charm was as inviting as a hug from a cactus, but after the chaos of their mission, it felt like home. A dysfunctional, bureaucratic home with terrible coffee, but home nonetheless. As they settled into their makeshift command center, Zira joined them, her presence as welcome as a surprise airlock inspection. So, We really doing this cultural exchange gig? She asked, eyes gleaming with excitement and maybe a touch of madness. Looks like it, Calix said, flopping into a chair with zero grace. We've got to keep them interested. And more importantly, keep them from blowing us to kingdom come, Trin snorted. Our survival hinges on holiday cheer. I can't decide if that's genius or idiotic. Why not both? Zira quipped, tapping away at her datapad once more. I mean, we've always been a little of both. Calix glanced around the room at the faces of the people who had somehow, against all odds, helped pull off this improbable feat. Here's to being both, he said, raising an imaginary glass. They all followed suit, toasting with invisible drinks to their strange, unexpected victory. Now who's up for some planning? Trin asked, pulling up a digital list of human holidays. We've got a lot of cultural weirdness to cover. Calix laughed, a genuine deep laugh that echoed through the room. I'd say we're just the team for the job. And so they began, piecing together the framework of a new piece, one built not on the false promises of treaties and contracts, but on something far more fragile and infinitely more powerful. An understanding that maybe, just maybe, they could find common ground in the chaos of human culture. As they worked, the specter of war still loomed in the distance, a reminder that their victory was as tenuous as a truce during a pub brawl. But for now, they had a chance to forge something new, and that was a victory worth celebrating. Because if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was making the best out of a bad situation, and dragging everyone along for the ride, whether they wanted to or not. The fallout from the meeting with Vornak was settling on Titan like the fine layer of moon dust that covered everything, including the human embassy's creaky, old architecture. Not that Calix was ever one to romanticize a building, best described as a relic of the Cold War with all the charm of a bureaucratic dungeon. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling with the intensity of someone pretending the stains above were constellations rather than water damage. Zira was across the room in her tech lair, surrounded by a jungle of wires and screens, the glow painting her features with a ghostly blue. She was the kind of tech nerd who made you think twice about what you clicked online, just in case she was watching, and she probably was. So, we actually did it, Zira said, breaking the silence that had stretched out like a bad date. Yeah, Calix replied, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief, and without getting turned into core FBBQ. A real bonus, Zira snorted, not bothering to look up from her datapad. Maybe we should buy a lottery ticket, or, just retire while we're ahead, Calix chuckled. Retire? What, and miss all this? He swept a hand around at the embassy's interior, as if presenting a grand vista rather than drab walls and flickering panels. Nah, I'm too invested in this dystopian soap opera to quit now. Fair point, Zira conceded, fingers dancing across her virtual keyboard with the grace of a concert pianist on a caffeine binge. Besides, where else would we find the thrill of narrowly avoiding interstellar conflict on a daily basis? The mood was lighter than it had been, a shift from the tension-laden prelude to the Korath meeting. Maybe it was the prospect of peace, or perhaps it was simply the relief of having survived yet another impossible scenario. Whatever it was, it felt good, like the universe had decided to give them a break, albeit a begrudging one. So, Zira said, swiveling in her chair to face Calix, what's the plan now? We gonna start planning those intergalactic holidays. Yeah, because nothing screams cultural exchange like burnt turkey and awkward family arguments, Calix said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Zira grinned. Exactly. If anything can bring species together, it's the mutual horror of yet another family dinner gone wrong. True, Calix admitted. And as a bonus, it's a great way to ensure everyone drinks enough to forget their differences. Before they could delve deeper into the logistics of such an endeavor, Trin walked in, looking like she just emerged from a skirmish with a particularly angry dust storm. Her hair was a mess, and her expression was one of practiced exasperation. "What's with the holiday planning committee?" Trin asked, zeroing in on the duo with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. "Just discussing the finer points of intergalactic cuisine," Zira replied with a shrug. "And by finer points, I mean ways to make sure nobody gets food poisoning." Trin rolled her eyes. "Great. Because that's what we need right now, more opportunities to test the limits of our digestive systems." "Hey," Calix said, raising his hands in mock defense. "You got a better idea? I'm all ears." "Honestly, no," Trin admitted, flopping into the nearest chair. "But the thought of trying to explain our customs to the Korath is enough to make me want to crawl into the nearest escape pod." "Well, no one's forcing you to be the cultural ambassador," Calix said, grinning. "We all know that's a job for someone with way too much enthusiasm and way too little common sense." Zira nodded sagely. "Exactly. Which is why it's perfect for you, Calix." "Oh, fantastic," Calix deadpanned. "I'll just add that to my resume, professional peacekeeper and holiday planner." The three of them shared a laugh, the kind that comes from a shared understanding of just how absurd their lives had become. It was a camaraderie forged in the fires of danger and desperation, and it was stronger than any official treaty. "Seriously, though," Trin said after the laughter had subsided, "what do we do if this actually works? If the Korath really start buying into this whole peace and goodwill thing?" Calix leaned back, considering the question seriously. "Then we do what humans do best," he said finally. "Adapt, survive, and find new ways to screw things up." Zira sighed dramatically. "And here I was hoping for a brighter outlook." "Hey, I'm a realist," Calix said with a shrug. "But that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the irony of it all." As the conversation turned to more practical matters, like how to organize a cultural exchange without provoking another near war, Calix couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't much, just a flicker in the vast, cold expanse of the galaxy, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you needed to keep going. The following days were a blur of activity and caffeine. Meetings with Korath delegates, brainstorming sessions that resembled brainstorming only in name, and more synth coffee than any sane person should ever consume. It was chaos, but it was their chaos, and they embraced it with the kind of grim determination that defined humanity. The Korath proved surprisingly receptive to the idea of cultural exchange, their initial skepticism giving way to a tentative curiosity. It seemed that even they weren't immune to the allure of human holidays, with all their strange customs and questionable culinary choices. Calix found himself at the center of it all, juggling the demands of diplomacy with the kind of deftness that came from years of experience dealing with interstellar politics. He was in his element, and though he'd never admit it, he was enjoying himself. One evening, as they wrapped up yet another marathon session of negotiations, Calix found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. He was seated in the embassy's dimly lit conference room, more storage closet than meeting space, watching as Zira and Trin argued over the best way to introduce the Korath to the concept of Thanksgiving. "Look, all I'm saying is that we can't just throw them into the deep end," Trin was insisting, her expression one of practiced patience. "We need to ease them in." "Where's the fun in that?" Zira shot back, her grin as mischievous as ever. "Half the fun of Thanksgiving is watching the crash and burn," Calix chuckled, interrupting before the debate could escalate into an all-out war of words. "Much as I love a good cultural clash, Trin's right. Baby steps, guys." Zira huffed, but her eyes were twinkling with amusement. "Fine, fine. But when they inevitably get hooked on pumpkin pie, don't say I didn't warn you." "Noted," Calix replied, making a mental note to stock up on the stuff, just in case. As the conversation turned to less contentious topics, Calix found himself lost in thought. It was strange to think that just a short while ago, they'd been at the brink of destruction, trapped between the machinations of the Korath faction and their own desperate attempts to broker peace. Now, things were different. The Korath, For all their technological prowess and cultural differences were learning. They were taking those first, tentative steps toward understanding, a process Calix was all too familiar with, having seen it play out time and again in the galaxy's endless conflicts. "Hey, Earth," to Calix, Zira's voice cut through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. "You still with us?" "Yeah," he said, shaking off his thoughts. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Zira smiled, a rare, genuine one that softened her usually sardonic features. "It's kind of amazing, isn't it, what a little bit of holiday spirit can do? And a lot of luck," Trin added, though her tone was more appreciative than cynical. Calix nodded. "True. But maybe that's what makes us human, the ability to find hope in the strangest places. And drag everyone else along for the ride," Zira quipped, her grin back in full force. The room fell into a comfortable silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome, misunderstandings to navigate, and the ever-present threat of war. But it was a start. As the meeting wrapped up and they made their way out of the conference room, Calix couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Whatever the future held, they had managed to carve out a small slice of peace in the vast, unpredictable chaos of the galaxy. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were a testament to the power of determination, stubbornness, and the occasional miracle. The Korath's integration of human holiday traditions was slow, fraught with misunderstandings, and the occasional diplomatic faux pas. But it was happening. The embassy became a hub of activity as humans and Korath mingled, exchanging ideas, traditions, and more than a few questionable recipes. The initial skepticism from both sides gradually gave way to a tentative camaraderie, fueled by the shared goal of peace. Calix watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. It was surreal, seeing these two vastly different species come together over human customs, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always the potential for change. One afternoon, as he stood watching a group of Korath attempt to carve jack-o'-lanterns with varying degrees of success, Zira joined him, her expression one of bemusement. "Well, this is a sight I never thought I'd see," she said, nodding toward the pumpkin carnage. Calix grinned. "Yeah, but you know what? I think it's just crazy enough to work." Zira chuckled. "Let's hope so. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of confused Korath on our hands come Christmas." "I'm sure they'll figure it out," Calix replied, watching as one particularly enthusiastic Korath managed to create a passable likeness of a smiling face. "After all, if we can survive this, we can survive anything." "Here's hoping," Zira said, raising an imaginary toast. They stood there for a moment longer, watching as the Korath continued their pumpkin endeavors, their laughter and chatter echoing through the embassy like a promise of better things to come. And as Calix took it all in, he realized that maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to stumble upon something truly remarkable. A chance to forge a new path, one where humanity and the Korath could learn from one another, sharing their strengths, their flaws, and their hopes for the future. Because in the end, that was the true power of the holidays, the ability to bring people together, no matter how different they might be. And as long as they held on to that, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. With that thought in mind, Calix turned to Zira, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Ready to tackle the next holiday, Zira rolled her eyes, but her grin was undeniably fond. "Bring it on." And with that, they dove back into the chaos, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Together.